While hiding in the back of class, my mentally ill teacher asked, "Did you all call your parents goodbye?" My girlfriend Molly put her hand under my desk and, "Please, Mrs. Dodson, you have to legally let us go." Mrs. Dodson was crying now with mascara running down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, but if I let you all run out of the class, the gunman might get you. We need to wait." I looked at Molly and tried to keep my voice steady. "Don't worry, babe. I'm going to figure out a way out of this." Mrs. Dodson had kept our entire class trapped in the room. She'd been acting strange all week, but today she locked the door during last period because she sensed a warning. Mrs. Dodson suddenly screamed and pointed at the door. "There! Did you hear those gunshots? Everyone get down!" We all looked at each other confused, but Mrs. Dodson was shaking and clutching a rosary to her chest. She herded all 20 of us to the back corner of the room furthest from the windows. She started praying in Latin while we huddled together. Some kids were crying. Others were texting their parents frantically. The school had probably already called, wondering where we were. Basketball practice had started 2 hours ago. Drama rehearsal was happening without half the cast. "Mrs. Dodson, I have an idea," I said, interrupting her prayer. "How about you let us out through the window since we're only on the first floor and we can all escape and get help?" She shook her head violently. "No! The gunman has friends outside. They'll shoot all of you the second you climb out. I won't let you leave." She started going around hugging each student and telling them she loved them. Kids were flinching away from her touch. This woman who usually graded papers with perfect posture was now wild-eyed and sweating through her cardigan. Bradley was the class troublemaker who usually slept through lessons. He stood up and crossed his arms. "Mrs. Dodson, you're so insane that you make me want to actually do my homework. Let us out, you crazy witch." School dismissal was 4 hours ago. Her face twisted into something ugly. "The only dismissal you're going to have is straight to hell. I should let you out of the classroom and let the gunman unload on you." "Fine then. Let's do it." Bradley walked toward the door. Mrs. Dodson immediately crumbled. "I'm sorry, sweetie. You know I can't let you leave here. I have to keep the door locked so I can protect you all." While she was focused on Bradley and trying to pull him back to the group, I saw my chance. Her keys were hanging from her belt loop. I carefully reached over and unclipped them, trying not to jingle the metal. Molly saw what I was doing and created more distraction by fake crying loudly. I crawled toward the door, staying low like we were actually in danger. I didn't realize till later that we really were. My hands were shaking as I found the right key. The lock clicked open and I yanked the door handle. "Run!" I shouted. All 20 students rushed for the door at once. Mrs. Dodson screamed and tried to grab people, but we pushed past her. We ran down the hallway and burst through the front entrance into the parking lot where police cars were everywhere. The cops had their hands on their weapons until they saw it was just a bunch of terrified teenagers. They immediately asked us what happened. "Our teacher went insane and trapped us in there for 4 hours, I told the nearest officer. He nodded grimly. "We're sorry we took so long. We just got the call about you guys after we searched in Mrs. Dodson's house. You won't believe what we found." The officer pulled out a small notebook from his chest pocket, and his face got even more serious than before. He started writing something down while shaking his head slowly, and I could see other cops behind him talking into their radios about something urgent. My legs were still shaking from running out of the building, and now this cop was making it worse with whatever he wasn't telling us yet. He looked up from his notebook and scanned our group of 20 scared students standing in a tight cluster near the school entrance. The officer opened his mouth to speak, but then closed it again, like he was trying to find the right words for what he needed to say. Behind him, I saw more police cars pulling into the parking lot with their lights flashing, but no sirens, which somehow made everything feel more serious. The officer finally told us they'd found walls covered in newspaper clippings about school shootings at Mrs. Dodson's house, along with detailed maps of our school building. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might throw up right there on the concrete. A black SUV pulled up, and a woman in a dark suit stepped out carrying a badge on her belt. She walked straight toward our group with quick, confident steps and introduced herself as Detective Galena Walker. She explained she'd need to talk to each of us separately, but first wanted to make sure everyone was okay and accounted for. Cars started flooding into the parking lot as parents got word about what happened, and the whole scene turned into complete chaos within minutes. I saw Molly's mom's red minivan screech to a stop, and she jumped out running toward us with tears streaming down her face. She grabbed Molly in the tightest hug I'd ever seen, while my dad's truck pulled up more slowly, and he got out looking confused and worried. He stood next to me with his hand on my shoulder but didn't say anything, which was typical for him in stressful situations. I could see Molly shaking in her mom's arms, even from 20 feet away, and I started walking toward them. Detective Walker stepped in front of me and said we needed to stay separated until she could interview everyone properly about what happened. The guilt from my promise to protect Molly started eating at me as I watched her cry into her mom's shoulder. Principal Burris's silver sedan pulled into the reserved spot, and he practically ran across the parking lot with his tie flapping behind him. He immediately started talking to Detective Walker about setting up interview rooms inside the main office away from all the chaos. He kept calling what happened the incident and using careful legal words while avoiding eye contact with any of us students. The whole parking lot felt like we were standing in the middle of a crime scene with yellow tape and everything. Detective Walker guided me away from the group toward a quieter spot near the flagpole where we could talk. She pulled out a digital recorder and asked if I was okay with her recording our conversation for the investigation. I nodded, and she pressed the red button, then asked me to start from the beginning of what happened in the classroom. She mentioned they'd already been looking into Mrs. Dodson after getting multiple calls from neighbors about her strange behavior over the past few weeks. This whole thing wasn't just about what happened today, which made me realize how deep this situation actually went. She told me what they found. At the house suggested Mrs. Dodson genuinely believed we were all in danger from a real threat. The detective wouldn't give me all the details yet, but said it involved extensive documentation of threats that didn't actually exist anywhere except in Mrs. Dodson's mind. My anger at being trapped for 4 hours started mixing with confusion about whether she was evil or just really sick. I kept fidgeting with my phone in my pocket and replaying the moment I unclipped her keys from her belt loop. The detective noticed my nervous movements and asked what I was thinking about while staring at me with these intense brown eyes. I admitted I wasn't sure if grabbing those keys and opening the door made me brave or just reckless and stupid. She wrote something in her notebook without answering my question, which made me even more nervous about the whole situation. 2 ambulances pulled into the parking lot, and paramedics started unloading equipment, even though nobody had gotten physically hurt during the lockdown. They went around checking each student's vital signs and asking about panic symptoms or signs of shock from the trauma. One girl from our class named Sarah couldn't stop hyperventilating, and her hands were shaking so bad she couldn't hold her phone. A paramedic gave her a brown paper bag to breathe into, while her mom rubbed her back and tried to calm her down. More cars kept arriving as parents rushed to pick up their kids, and the parking lot turned into absolute chaos. Some parents were yelling at Principal Burris, demanding to know how a teacher could lock students in a classroom for 4 hours. Other parents just stood there crying and holding their kids like they'd never let go again after almost losing them. The whole scene felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life on TV instead of living through it myself. Principal Burris climbed onto a bench and used a megaphone to make an announcement over all the noise and confusion. He said school would be closed tomorrow while they reviewed safety protocols, and counselors would be available for any student who needed support. He used vague corporate language about ensuring student safety going forward without actually explaining what went wrong or taking any responsibility. Nobody seemed satisfied with his non-answers, and parents kept shouting questions at him about lawsuits and accountability for what happened to us today. Bradley spotted a white news van pulling up with a satellite dish on top and immediately started walking toward it before anyone could stop him. The reporter was fixing her hair in the side mirror when Bradley tapped her shoulder and started talking really fast about being trapped for 4 hours. She quickly motioned for her camera guy to start rolling, while Bradley stood there with his hands moving everywhere as he talked. He was saying stuff about how he stood up to Mrs. Dodson and basically saved everyone by distracting her while I got the keys. Other kids from our class were shaking their heads and rolling their eyes at his version of events, but nobody had the energy to correct him. Mrs. Dodson's behavior has me really curious, crying with mascara running down her face while insisting she's protecting students from a gunman nobody else can hear. The way she clutched that rosary and herded 20 kids into a corner makes me wonder what triggered this breakdown after acting strange all week. The reporter kept nodding and asking him questions, while the camera guy zoomed in on Bradley's face, which was all red and sweaty from excitement. I watched him point at the school building and make these big dramatic gestures like he was in some action movie or something. Part of me wanted to walk over and tell the real story, but another part just didn't care anymore about who got credit. My phone buzzed with a text from Molly saying she couldn't do this anymore and just wanted to leave with her parents right now. She was already walking toward their car without looking back at me or anyone else from our class. Her mom had her arm around Molly's shoulders, and her dad was carrying her backpack while they guided her away from all the chaos. I started to follow them but stopped when I realized she needed space, and my being there wouldn't help anything. The promise I made to protect her in that classroom felt so stupid now that we were safe and she was leaving without me. Detective Walker walked over and handed me a small white business card with the police department logo on it. She told me I'd need to come to the station tomorrow morning to give my full statement about everything that happened in the classroom. Her voice had this weird tone like she knew something bad that she wasn't telling me yet about Mrs. Dodson. She mentioned there was a lot more to this story than just a teacher having a breakdown, and we'd talk about it tomorrow. I put the card in my pocket and watched her walk over to talk to other students from our class. My dad finally said we should go home, and I followed him to his truck without saying anything else to anyone. That night, I laid in bed staring at the ceiling and couldn't stop thinking about Mrs. Dodson hugging each of us in the classroom. The way she held on to us and whispered that she loved us seemed so creepy at the time, but now it felt different. She really thought she was saying goodbye to us, because we were all about to die from some shooter that didn't exist. The image of her clutching that rosary and praying in Latin kept playing over and over in my head like a movie. My phone started going crazy with notifications from our class group chat that someone had started after we all got out. Everyone was sharing their own theories about why Mrs. Dodson went crazy and what the police found at her house. Someone said their older brother heard Mrs. Dodson had called 911 earlier in the week about gunshots that turned out to be construction noise from the new houses being built nearby. Another person said she'd been reporting suspicious cars in the school parking lot almost every day for the past month. The pieces of her paranoia were starting to form this weird pattern that made more sense looking back at how she'd been acting lately. I kept thinking about what Detective Walker said about there being more to the story and what that could mean. My brain kept creating all these scenarios about what the police found at her house, and each one was worse than the last. Maybe she had weapons or plans to hurt people or some manifesto about protecting us from imaginary threats. The not knowing was somehow worse than anything that actually happened in that classroom with her. I finally fell asleep around 3 in the morning, but woke up when my phone rang at 7 with Detective Walker's name on the screen. She asked if I could come to the station earlier than we planned, because they'd been reviewing Mrs. Dodson's 911 calls from the past month. She said there was a clear pattern of escalation where she reported suspicious activity almost every single day leading up to yesterday. The calls started with minor stuff like strange cars, but got more intense with reports of people following her and watching the school. I got dressed, and my dad drove me to the police station, which was this old brick building downtown that I'd never been inside before. Detective Walker met us in the lobby and took me to a small interview room with a table and 4 chairs. She pulled out her laptop and turned it toward me, showing a photo that made my stomach drop completely. Mrs. Dodson's living room wall was covered in newspaper clippings about school shootings from all over the country going back years. Red string connected different articles like those conspiracy boards you see in movies about crazy people trying to solve crimes. She'd been living inside this fear for weeks, or maybe months, based on how many articles were taped to that wall. Detective Walker clicked to another photo showing sticky notes with our class seating chart and notes about which desks were closest to exits. She played an audio file from her computer of a 911 call from 3 nights ago where Mrs. Dodson was reporting automatic weapon fire. You could hear fireworks popping in the background while she insisted someone was shooting at houses in her neighborhood. She'd called 4 times that night, and each call sounded more panicked than the one before about active shooters. The dispatcher notes showed they were getting really worried about her mental state and had flagged her number for special attention. Detective Walker told me that Mrs. Dodson's neighbor, a guy named Evander Gray, had called them twice in the past 2 weeks. He'd seen her pacing her yard at 3 in the morning with a flashlight looking for what she called intruders hiding in the bushes. Evander had tried talking to her about it, but she accused him of being part of the threat against the school. The paranoia had completely taken over her mind to the point where everyone was either a victim needing protection or an enemy. Detective Walker pulled out a big plastic bag filled with white envelopes and set it on the table between us. Each envelope had a student's name written in Mrs. Dodson's perfect teacher handwriting, and they were all dated 3 days ago. She found mine in the pile and held it up, asking if I wanted to know what it said, but I shook my head because I wasn't ready to hear whatever crazy stuff she'd written about me. My dad got an email on his phone right then from Principal Burris, calling what happened a mental health crisis and saying all the parents needed to know that proper protocols were being reviewed. The email said we'd all have to go to mandatory counseling sessions starting next week, and the way he wrote it sounded so cold and formal, like he was more worried about getting sued than about us kids. Detective Walker opened her laptop again and showed me another photo that made my whole body go cold. Mrs. Dodson had a gun in her bedroom safe with 3 boxes of bullets that she'd bought 2 weeks ago from a local gun store after she became convinced someone was planning to attack our school. The detective said the gun was totally legal, and Mrs. Dodson had passed all the background checks, which somehow made it scarier that she could just buy a weapon while having all these delusions. She clicked to the next photo, showing a black backpack by Mrs. Dodson's front door, packed with zip ties, duct tape, a hammer, rope, and first aid supplies. Detective Walker explained that Mrs. Dodson had been preparing this go bag thinking she'd need to barricade our classroom against attackers, and the amount of planning that went into her delusion made everything feel way more real and dangerous. 3 days later, I had my first meeting with the school counselor, Rachel Addison, who taught me this breathing thing where you count to 4 while you breathe in and then count to 4 while you breathe out. She said the panic I felt in crowded spaces now was called hypervigilance, and it was totally normal after what we went through. But knowing that didn't make the constant feeling of being on edge go away. Rachel had me practice the breathing while she made sudden noises to help me not jump every time something unexpected happened, and we worked on grounding techniques where I had to name 5 things I could see and 4 things I could touch. My phone buzzed during the session with a text from Molly that I'd been waiting days for, but it wasn't what I wanted to hear. She said she wasn't ready to see anyone, including me, because she needed space to process everything without feeling like she had to be okay for other people, and even though I understood, it still hurt that she didn't want my help. That same night, Bradley posted on Instagram that I almost got everyone killed by unlocking the door without knowing what was outside, and a bunch of our classmates started commenting, either defending me or agreeing with him. The whole online fight felt so stupid compared to what actually happened, but it still made me angry that he was trying to make himself look better by making me look bad. 2 days after that, I had to go back to the police station for my official interview, where Detective Walker recorded everything while I went through every single detail of taking the keys and opening the door. She asked if I'd considered that Mrs. Dodson might have been right about danger being outside, and that question stuck in my head, making me doubt whether I'd done the right thing or just gotten lucky. My dad heard from another parent that Principal Burris held an emergency staff meeting where they talked about new protocols for identifying mental health problems in teachers. The administration was clearly freaking out about lawsuits because parents were already talking about suing the school for not noticing Mrs. Dodson was losing it before she trapped us. The next week, I had my first real session with Counselor Rachel, where we talked about why I felt like I had to protect everyone in that classroom. She helped me understand that my need to be the hero came from feeling powerless when Mrs. Dodson locked us in, and that trying to control everything was my way of dealing with the trauma. We worked on accepting that I was just a teenager who did his best in an impossible situation, and that it wasn't my job to save everyone, even though that's what I'd tried to do. Talk about going from classroom hero to homework on how to breathe properly. Nothing quite prepares you for therapy sessions where sudden noises are part of the curriculum, while Bradley's busy playing keyboard warrior about door-opening decisions. Detective Walker called me back to the station 3 days later with a thick folder of papers she spread across the metal table. She showed me 12 different reports Mrs. Dodson had filed with the school board over the past month. Each report got crazier, with plots about gangs targeting our school and terrorist cells recruiting students. The detective pointed to dates showing how the reports got more detailed and paranoid every week. The administration had finally scheduled a mental health check for her, but it was set for next week, which was too late. That night, the local news ran a whole segment about Mrs. Dodson with old photos from when she won Teacher of the Year 3 different times. Former students they interviewed kept saying she was always super caring, but really intense about keeping kids safe. The reporter said something changed big time about 2 months ago, according to everyone who knew her. I couldn't stop thinking about it, so I found Evander Gray's number in the phone book and called him. He picked up on the third ring, and when I said who I was, he got really quiet before telling me to come over. His house was 2 blocks from Mrs. Dodson's, and he met me at the door looking tired. He said she'd stopped sleeping about 6 weeks ago, and he'd see her lights on at 3 in the morning every single night. He heard her dragging furniture around to block her doors and windows like she was preparing for an attack. She told him about having these visions of violence that felt like messages from God, warning her about danger. The way he described it made my skin crawl, because she really believed she was seeing the future. He mentioned she'd started asking him weird questions about our class, like which kids sat by windows and who could get to exits fast. She'd been drawing maps of our classroom for weeks, marking where each student sat and planning escape routes. The detail she put into protecting us from her imaginary threat made everything feel way more real and scary. Detective Walker called me the next morning to say one of the sealed letters had been opened with the family's permission. She read parts of it over the phone, and Mrs. Dodson was apologizing for scaring us, but insisting the danger was real. She wrote that she had to act because nobody else could see what was coming, even though she tried to warn them. The detective said the letter showed how completely Mrs. Dodson believed her delusion, which made it sad instead of just scary. I was sitting in my room trying to process everything when I heard a knock on my front door. Molly was standing there with red eyes, and before I could say anything, she pushed past me into the house. She started crying hard about how she jumps every time she hears a loud noise now and can't sleep without nightmares. Then she got mad at me, saying I made her feel weak by acting like she needed me to save her. She said she was handling things fine until I kept promising to protect her, which made her feel helpless. We sat on my couch for 3 hours, talking about how we both dealt with the trauma differently. She needed to feel strong and independent, while I needed to feel like I could control something. We agreed to respect each other's ways of healing, even though it was hard for both of us. The next day at the school, everyone was whispering about how I might get in trouble for taking the keys. Some parents were saying I put everyone in danger by opening the door without knowing what was outside. The school needed someone to blame for the whole mess, and I was easier to go after than admitting they ignored Mrs. Dodson's problems. The unfairness of it made me so mad, I punched my locker and got sent to the office. Principal Burris called my parents and scheduled a meeting for the next morning about my unauthorized classroom exit. When I walked into his office, he had a legal pad full of notes and kept using formal words about safety situations. He asked me to explain my decision-making process during the incident like he was reading from a script. I could tell the school's lawyers had coached him on exactly what to say to avoid lawsuits. He said they needed to review whether I violated emergency protocols by taking independent action during a crisis. Then he leaned back and offered me a deal where I'd join the new student safety committee instead of facing formal discipline. It felt like they were trying to buy my silence, but I agreed because I didn't want this following me to college. The compromise left a bad taste in my mouth, but I knew it was the smart choice. That afternoon, I had another session with Counselor Rachel, where I told her how angry I was about being punished for saving everyone. She taught me this technique where I separate what I can control from what I can't control. We made lists on paper with things like my own reactions on one side and other people's decisions on the other. The tools helped me manage my anger better, but they didn't make it go away completely. 2 days later, Rachel had us all come in for group counseling, and I sat in a circle with 12 other kids from the class. She asked us to share how we felt when Mrs. Dodson went around hugging everyone that day. Sarah started crying and said it felt gross because Mrs. Dodson was sweating and wouldn't let go. Simon said he actually felt better when she hugged him because at least someone was doing something even if it was weird. Jessica got mad and said Mrs. Dodson had no right to touch any of us without permission. The different reactions surprised me because I'd assumed everyone hated it the same way I did. Rachel wrote notes on her clipboard, while kids argued about whether Mrs. Dodson was trying to help or just being creepy. Tommy said the hug made him think we were all about to die, which made everything worse. Ashley admitted she'd wanted her mom, and Mrs. Dodson's hug was the closest thing she could get. The variety of responses showed me how differently we'd all experienced the exact same moment. Detective Walker called me that afternoon and asked me to come to the station because she had new information about Mrs. Dodson's behavior before the incident. When I got there, she had a stack of printed emails on her desk that Mrs. Dodson had sent to the school board. She'd been begging them to install bulletproof glass in all the classroom windows for weeks. The emails got more desperate each time, with Mrs. Dodson offering to pay for everything using her retirement savings. She'd calculated the exact cost for reinforced doors and metal detectors down to the penny. Detective Walker showed me one email where Mrs. Dodson wrote she'd sell her car if that's what it took to keep us safe. The desperation in those messages made my stomach hurt because she really believed we were in danger. Walker pulled out another folder with Mrs. Dodson's medical records that her family had given permission to share. The papers showed she'd switched anxiety medications about 7 weeks ago after her old prescription stopped working. She'd missed her next 2 appointments with her psychiatrist because she said she felt fine. The new medication had a warning label about paranoid thoughts as a rare side effect in some patients. The timeline matched up perfectly with when everyone noticed her behavior changing at the school. Walker said the medication probably triggered something that was already there waiting to come out. I found myself in the hallway at the school the next day when a group of kids were talking about pressing charges against Mrs. Dodson. They wanted her arrested for kidnapping us, and I surprised myself by jumping in to defend her. I explained that she wasn't evil, just sick, and her brain was telling her lies that felt completely real to her. The other kids looked at me like I was crazy for taking her side after what she did to us. I kept trying to make them understand that she genuinely thought she was saving our lives, even though her mind was broken. The shift from being mad at her to feeling sorry for her had happened without me noticing. Bradley got called to the police station that same afternoon because his story about what happened kept changing every time he told it. Detective Walker grilled him about the details, and he started sweating when she pointed out the contradictions. He'd been telling everyone he stood up to Mrs. Dodson and basically saved the class, but Walker had statements from other kids saying he mostly just yelled. Watching him squirm under her questions gave me satisfaction I wasn't proud of feeling. He'd been using our trauma to make himself look like a hero, and now he was getting caught. Walker made him write down his statement 3 different times until he finally admitted he'd exaggerated some parts. Principal Burris called an assembly the next morning, where he announced Mrs. Dodson had been placed on indefinite medical leave. He used careful lawyer words about the district pursuing appropriate support options for her situation. Everyone knew that meant they were pushing her to retire instead of firing her, which would look bad. The announcement felt both kind and cowardly at the same time because they were protecting themselves more than her. Parents started showing up for an emergency meeting that night, and the gym was packed with angry people demanding answers. One dad stood up and shouted about why a mentally unstable teacher had access to children for weeks. Detective Walker tried explaining that Mrs. Dodson's breakdown happened suddenly, but parents weren't buying it. Principal Burris kept saying they followed all protocols, but that just made people madder. The shouting got so loud that some parents started pushing toward the front, demanding someone take responsibility. Walker had to step between 2 dads who looked ready to throw punches over whose kid was more traumatized. The anger in that room needed a target, and the school officials were the easiest ones to blame. Molly came over after the meeting, and we got into our first real fight about something I'd said in my police statement. Detective Walker showing 12 reports makes me wonder exactly what Mrs. Dodson was seeing in her mind that felt so real. Like, how does a brain create such detailed false threats that someone would file that many warnings? She'd read the transcript and saw where I called myself a hero for getting the keys and saving everyone. She said I was making her trauma about my ego and turning it into a story where I was the main character. Her words stung because I knew she was right about me needing to be the hero in every situation. We sat on my bed for 2 hours going back and forth about how we talked about that day. She said calling ourselves heroes and victims made it feel like a movie instead of something real that hurt us. We finally agreed to stop using those words and just call it what happened to us without making it dramatic. The next morning, the local news played audio from one of the 911 calls made from our classroom during the incident. I was in history class when someone pulled it up on their phone, and suddenly I heard Sarah crying in the background. My chest got tight, and I couldn't breathe properly so I grabbed my stuff and ran out of the room. The panic attack hit me in the hallway, and I ended up sitting on the floor shaking while the nurse tried to calm me down. I'd thought I was handling everything fine until hearing those sounds brought me right back to that room. 3 days later, I tried going back to basketball practice thinking it would help me feel normal again. The second I heard sneakers squeaking on the gym floor, my brain went straight to Mrs. Dodson's shoes, pacing back and forth in front of the door. My hands started shaking, and I missed every shot I took because I kept looking at the exits. I made it through 10 minutes of drills before I had to leave and threw up in the parking lot. Coach found me sitting by my car and told me to take all the time I needed before coming back. Detective Walker called me 2 weeks later while I was eating lunch in the cafeteria and asked me to come by the station after school. I drove there in my beat-up Honda and found her waiting in the lobby with a thick folder under her arm. She led me to the same interview room where I'd given my statement weeks ago and opened the folder on the metal table between us. The prosecutor filed charges for false imprisonment, but they're offering a plea deal for mental health treatment instead of jail time. She showed me the paperwork with all the legal terms highlighted in yellow. The stack of papers was thicker than my history textbook, and seeing Mrs. Dodson's name typed out in official court documents made everything feel more real than it had in weeks. I stared at the papers while Walker explained how the court recognized that Mrs. Dodson was sick when she locked us in that classroom. That night I sat at my desk and started writing Mrs. Dodson a letter on notebook paper. My hand kept shaking as I wrote about understanding she was trying to protect us and hoping she would get better. I crossed out sentences and started over 3 times before I had something that didn't sound angry or fake. The next morning, I brought the letter to Detective Walker at the station and asked if she could deliver it if the doctors said it was okay. She took the letter and put it in an evidence bag with Mrs. Dodson's name written on the label. Rachel called me into her office later that day, and I showed her a copy of the letter I'd kept. She sat next to me on the couch and went through each line with a red pen, helping me change parts that sounded like I was saying what happened was okay. "You can understand her illness without excusing the harm," she said, while crossing out a whole paragraph. We rewrote it together, focusing on how I felt scared and confused, instead of trying to make Mrs. Dodson feel better about what she did. Principal Burris stopped me in the hallway the next day and asked me to come to his office after last period. He had a folder on his desk about the new Student Safety Committee and wanted me to speak at their first meeting next week. I could tell from his fake smile that they wanted to use me as proof they were doing something about what happened. I agreed, but told him I was going to talk about mental health support for teachers, not just locks and cameras. His smile got tighter, but he nodded and wrote my name on the speaker list. My phone buzzed during dinner with a text from Evander Gray, saying Mrs. Dodson's family had moved her to a treatment place an hour away. He sent a photo of her empty house with a for sale sign in the front yard and said the whole neighborhood felt weird without her checking on everyone all the time. The house looked smaller in the photo than I remembered from when Detective Walker had shown us the evidence photos. 3 days later, Walker called me back to the station and spread out papers across the conference room table, showing everything they'd found. The wall of newspaper articles about school shootings covered in red marker, the recordings of construction noise she'd reported as gunshots, the sealed letters she'd written to each of us saying goodbye, the go bag with zip ties, and duct tape, the gun she'd bought 2 weeks before locking us in, and records showing she'd missed 3 doctor appointments for her new anxiety medication. Each piece of evidence had a yellow tag with a case number, and seeing it all laid out like a puzzle made me understand how sick she really was. Rachel had me bring the letter to our next session and asked me to read it out loud while she sat across from me. My voice cracked on the second paragraph, and by the time I got to the part about being just a scared kid trying to help, I was crying harder than I had since that day in the classroom. She handed me tissues and reminded me that I did the best I could in a bad situation that no teenager should have to handle. The crying felt like dropping a heavy backpack I'd been carrying for weeks, without realizing how much it weighed. Molly started coming to sessions with me the week after that, and we sat on opposite ends of Rachel's couch, working out ways to talk when one of us got triggered by something. We came up with hand signals where touching our chest meant we needed space, and reaching out meant we needed support. Rachel had us practice the signals while talking about that day until we could use them without thinking. The system wasn't perfect, and we still messed up sometimes, but it helped us stop fighting about who was handling things better. Bradley found me at my locker before first period on a Tuesday and stood there looking at his shoes while kids pushed past us in the hallway. He mumbled something about being sorry for saying stuff online about me almost getting everyone killed. I could tell it was killing him to apologize, but he did it anyway. We weren't going to be friends or even talk much, but the anger between us faded into just avoiding each other in the hallways. The principal sent out an email that afternoon announcing new rules, including monthly mental health check-ins for all teachers and staff, plus clear plans for classroom emergencies that didn't involve teachers making their own decisions about locking doors. The changes felt like closing the barn door after the horse was gone, but at least something good might come from what we went through. Rachel sent me a text 2 days later with a link to the local paper's website, where her op-ed was already getting tons of comments. She'd changed all our names, but I could pick out my own words about feeling responsible for everyone's safety, even though I was just a kid. The article talked about how schools need better support for both students and teachers dealing with trauma. My dad read it at breakfast and kept nodding while he ate his cereal. The comments section had parents arguing about whether Mrs. Dodson should go to jail or get treatment. Some people called us brave, while others said we were lucky nothing worse happened. Rachel had included the part where I said taking the keys felt like the only choice, even though I had no idea what was really happening. Basketball practice that afternoon went better than any day since the incident. Coach had me start with just dribbling drills while the team ran plays at the other end of the court. When my breathing got fast, I stepped outside like Rachel taught me and counted backwards from 20. After 10 minutes, I went back in and managed to shoot free throws for another 15 minutes. The squeaking shoes still made me tense, but I stayed on the court for the whole hour. My teammates didn't say anything when I took breaks, but I caught them watching to make sure I was okay. Detective Walker called me after practice and asked if I could stop by the station. She had an envelope with my name written in Mrs. Dodson's shaky handwriting. The note inside was only 2 sentences saying, "Thank you for staying calm," and that she was getting the help she needed. Walker said the doctors thought it would help Mrs. Dodson's recovery to know we were okay. I folded the note and put it in my pocket. The anger I'd been carrying around started to feel less heavy. That night I wrote her back just saying I hoped she got better. Principal Burris left a voicemail asking me to come to his office before first period. He had a letter on official school letterhead saying my disciplinary review was closed due to extraordinary circumstances and completion of safety committee service. The letter cleared me of any wrongdoing in the incident. He made me sign a copy for their files and gave me the original to keep. The whole thing felt stupid since I never should have been in trouble for saving everyone, but at least it was over. The student forum happened 3 days later in the gym, with about 200 people showing up. When it was my turn to speak, I walked to the microphone and looked at all the faces staring at me. I told them fear made everyone do things that seemed crazy later, including Mrs. Dodson thinking she was protecting us. I said I wasn't a hero, and she wasn't a villain. We were all just scared people trying to survive something that felt real, even if it wasn't. The timing of all these official responses feels awfully convenient. Walker showing evidence 12 reports later, Burris suddenly forming committees, everyone apologizing right when lawyers get involved. Rachel's red pen editing session seems like damage control dressed up as therapy, making sure the letter says exactly what the school district needs it to say. Some parents looked angry that I wasn't calling for her to be locked up forever. Bradley actually nodded when I said the whole thing was more complicated than good guys and bad guys. After the forum, Molly met me by my locker, and we walked down the hall toward the classroom where everything happened. We stopped at the door and just stood there looking through the little window. New posters covered the walls, and someone had moved all the desks into different spots. We didn't say anything, but held hands while we breathed together. After a few minutes, we walked away and went to our separate classes. The silence between us said more than any words could have. My mom showed me an email from the district that afternoon, announcing Mrs. Dodson had officially retired and her case was going through mental health court instead of regular criminal court. She'd get mandatory treatment instead of prison time. The email used lots of legal words, but basically said she was too sick to be punished like a regular criminal. Some parents posted angry responses on the school Facebook page, but most people seemed relieved she was getting help. 5 weeks after that day, I walked down the hallway and only jumped a little when someone slammed a locker. The breathing exercises Rachel taught me actually worked most of the time. Molly and I had a system where we'd text each other before walking past certain places that made us nervous. We'd gotten better at knowing when the other person needed space versus when they needed support. I headed to basketball practice while she went to drama rehearsal. We had plans to meet up after and walk home together. The panic attacks still happened sometimes, but they didn't last as long. Other kids who were in the room that day would nod at me in the halls, and we'd share this look that meant we understood something other people didn't. My grades had dropped a little, but my teachers were giving me extra time to catch up. The whole thing felt like it happened years ago and yesterday at the same time. We were different now, but we were okay and getting better every day. Time to close the book on this journey, folks. Appreciate you letting me drop my clever quips and observations along the way today. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.